There's a lie being pushed in America, and Thomas Sowell cracked it wide open. See, the mainstream narrative says all outcomes in black communities come down to systemic racism and the legacy of slavery. And yet, when you pull the curtain back, Sowell shows us something deeper, something more uncomfortable, something more liberating. Let's get one thing straight. Sowell isn't disrespecting black people. He's liberating them from the trap of pity, the trap of white guilt, the trap of assuming that every dysfunction has a white cause behind it and never a cultural or behavioral origin. Now here's the twist. Sowell says that what many see as authentic black culture, the street talk, the violence, the disdain for education, the hypermasculinity, is not African. It's not even uniquely black. It's inherited, but not from Africa, from a certain segment of white America. The poor, rural, violent, anti-intellectual Scotch-Irish culture of the South. He calls it the culture of the black redneck. And it's not genetic, it's not racial, it's cultural. Adopted, absorbed, and passed down in black ghettos because of historical proximity and shared geography. Let that sink in. What we often call ghetto behavior didn't come from slavery. It came from poor white Southern redneck culture, a culture that was once ridiculed across the nation for its backwardness, its broken English, its hostility to schooling, its impulsive violence, and its chaos. That culture wasn't praised when it was white. So why is it protected now that it's seen as black? That's where the second half of Sowell's title hits. White liberals. Sowell accuses white liberals of doing something devastating, romanticizing dysfunction when it appears in minority groups, making excuses, weaponizing empathy, preserving destructive behaviors under the mask of cultural authenticity. So instead of helping poor black communities rise out of chaos, these liberal elites turn failure into identity. They call it culture. They call it oppression. They call it keeping it real. And instead of encouraging transformation, they protect self-destruction. What Sowell dares to say is this: culture matters, behavior matters, history matters, but not in the way you've been told. This is the conversation nobody wants to have, because it doesn't sell pity, it doesn't flatter guilt, it demands accountability from everyone. If culture is learned, not inherited, then transformation is always possible. That's the real threat Sowell poses to the status quo. Because once you admit that the street culture glamorized in films, music, and even classrooms didn't come from Africa or slavery, but from poor, dysfunctional white Southern culture, then suddenly you're forced to admit something dangerous. It can be unlearned. It isn't sacred, it's not destiny, it's not blackness, it's baggage. See, the real insult to black America isn't racism. It's low expectations. It's the liberal lie that says, this is just how they are, don't expect more. That lie keeps power in the hands of those who profit off failure, activists, politicians, and media outlets selling victimhood like its identity. But here's what Sowell lays out, backed by brutal facts. Before the 1960s, black communities were making real strides, faster than white liberals want you to remember. Black labor force participation was higher than white labor force participation. Two-parent households were the norm. Literacy was climbing. Business ownership was spreading. Crime far lower than it became after the so-called Great Society. So what happened? The elite stepped in. Government subsidies, welfare dependency, progressive education, and worst of all, the glamorization of the worst traits in the name of racial authenticity. Instead of encouraging values that built progress, discipline, education, work ethic, liberals elevated rebellion, resentment, and rage. They handed black Americans a blueprint for permanent protest instead of upward mobility. They created a system where failure was proof of oppression and success was acting white. Sowell's not saying black folks are doomed. He's saying they were sabotaged. Sabotaged by false friends in high places, by white liberals who needed black struggle to justify their own political relevance, who protected chaos by calling it culture, who handed out checks instead of freedom, who buried real history to replace it with a myth, one where black destiny is controlled entirely by white people, past or present. And here's the craziest part. This cultural baggage isn't limited to black people. The same dysfunction that gripped the South, violence, honor culture, illiteracy, impulsiveness, once affected poor whites just as badly. But no one protected it. No one romanticized it. And over time, Much of it faded away. What Sowell reveals is simple. Cultural pathology doesn't need protection. It needs correction. But correction takes truth, and truth is offensive when your whole identity is built on a lie. This book is not a condemnation. It's a wake-up call. Sowell isn't saying Black Americans are inherently broken. He's saying they've been sold a broken culture and then told it's treasure. Now dig deeper, because Sowell doesn't stop at American ghettos. He zooms out and shows how the same liberal patterns play out globally. Around the world, Sowell saw a repeating cycle. A group struggles, culture clashes with modern expectations, and instead of being challenged to adapt, they get coddled by elites who call it respecting diversity. That's not compassion, that's sabotage. In country after country, group after group, the real key to progress wasn't cash, it wasn't protest, it was cultural reform. Embracing habits and norms that allowed people to function in a modern economy. Punctuality, literacy, savings, long-term planning, conflict resolution. This isn't about race, it's about readiness. So when Sowell looks at American cities flooded with government money, programs, and pity, and yet sees rising dysfunction, he knows what's wrong. You can't fix broken culture with free stuff. And here's where it gets even harder to swallow. Many of the most successful Black Americans in history didn't grow up in the so-called Black redneck culture. They were raised in urban environments with different values, different accents, and a hunger for education. Many were closer in culture to Jews, Irish, or Italian immigrants than to poor rural Southerners. So ask yourself, why is that culture erased? Why are the success stories buried while the dysfunction is amplified and defended? Because it doesn't serve the narrative. Because independence ruins dependency. Because Black success not rooted in rebellion challenges the activist industrial complex. It reveals the lie, that the system is completely to blame, that behavior doesn't matter, that culture is untouchable. Sowell shows us this truth. You can change your reality by changing your culture. But to do that, you have to stop protecting the parts of your identity that are pulling you down. The street code, the glorified violence, the anti-education attitude, that's not power, that's a performance. A script handed down from poor, violent, uneducated white Southerners centuries ago. It didn't help them win. It won't help now. Sowell was born into poverty. No father. Raised in Harlem. But he rejected the redneck template. He read. He worked. He thought. He challenged everything. Even the civil rights movement's sacred cows. And that's what really scares the establishment. A Black man who doesn't need their permission to tell the truth. He goes further. He exposes how white liberals will use history to explain failure, but never to explain success. They'll tell you slavery explains Black poverty, but they won't tell you how millions of immigrants who came to America with nothing, facing discrimination, language barriers, and violence, still built businesses, families, and legacies. They'll talk about oppression, but they won't explain why West Indian immigrants, Black people from the Caribbean, often outperformed native-born Black Americans in education and income. Same skin, different culture. They'll scream about racism, but they won't explain why Chinese immigrants, once violently excluded, mocked, and murdered, rose to dominate in education and business. Why? Because culture shatters the victimhood narrative. Because if success is possible through values, choices, and discipline, then the whole structure built around permanent outrage collapses. And that's bad for business, bad for academia, bad for politicians who thrive on grievance. So instead, they promote a model of justice that protects bad behavior and condemns anyone, Black or white, who dares to say, "We can do better." Sowell makes it plain. The fight isn't Black versus white, it's truth versus comfort, progress versus pity, dignity versus dependency. And the question is, which side are you on? Let's zoom in on one of the most disturbing examples. Education. For Sowell, nothing symbolizes the betrayal of Black potential more than what happened to education in the inner cities. Once upon a time, Black schools, yes, even under segregation, had discipline, order, and standards. Teachers demanded excellence. Parents expected results. Students learned. But then came the new wave of liberalism. Integration became the goal, but not on merit. Instead of strengthening Black schools, they weakened standards across the board. Disciplinary policies changed, expectations dropped, excuses multiplied. And when Black students began falling behind, guess what they blamed? not the shift in culture, not the erosion of standards, but racism. Not racism from the outside, but from anyone who expected more. The tragic result: generations of black youth taught that excellence is betrayal, that order is oppression, that achievement is acting white. It's psychological warfare disguised as progress. And while they preached equity, they produced entropy. They gave students feelings instead of facts, affirmation instead of accountability. They removed consequences, ignored discipline, and called chaos freedom. The outcome? Black students trapped in systems that no longer educate, and told it's someone else's fault. Sowell doesn't accept that. He shows that when black students are placed in schools that maintain standards, like charter schools, Catholic schools, or strict public academies, they thrive. When culture shifts, outcomes shift. But here's what the liberal elite fear most: proof that behavior and values matter more than government programs. Because if that's true, their entire identity, built on being saviors, crumbles. They don't want black independence. They want perpetual struggle, because struggle is profitable. But Sowell calls their bluff and hands the keys back to the individual. You want to fix poverty? Then fix the culture. That's Sowell's message. And that means doing something radical, holding a mirror up to the community, not to shame it, but to wake it up. Sowell makes it clear, this isn't about white people saving black people. This is about black people reclaiming their power by rejecting the dead weight. That includes the glorification of ignorance, the elevation of thugs as heroes, the defense of failure as oppression. That includes rejecting the idea that low standards are a form of love. They're not, they're poison. True love challenges, it disciplines, it demands better. Sowell reminds us, every successful community in history had to go through this. The Irish weren't always respected. The Italians weren't always rich. The Jews weren't always accepted. Each group had to cut ties with parts of their culture that held them back. Alcoholism, violence, illiteracy, corruption. They didn't whine, they evolved. And that's the secret the liberal elite want to keep buried. Culture is not a cage, it's a choice, and it can change. But that change starts with truth. And the truth is, the ghetto mindset is not heritage, it's sabotage. The idea that toughness is measured in aggression, that intelligence is weakness, that women are disposable, that fatherhood is optional, none of that is power. It's a performance of pain passed off as identity. And if we keep protecting it, romanticizing it, or blaming it on long-dead plantation owners, it'll eat another generation alive. You know what real oppression looks like? It looks like being told your future is out of your hands. It looks like schools that won't punish violence because it's part of the culture. It looks like politicians who only show up to cry with you, but never build with you. It looks like being told you can't by people who look just like you and who call you a sellout when you do. That's not liberation. That's a cage with golden bars, and Thomas Sowell kicks that cage open. He says, stop romanticizing rage. Stop defending failure. Stop outsourcing your future to people who need you broken to feel virtuous. You want real power? Then take back the narrative, reclaim excellence, celebrate families, build institutions, defend order, demand more. Because the world doesn't owe you success. It only respects results. Sowell dismantles every sacred cow in the liberal playbook, and he doesn't flinch. He calls out black leaders who preach outrage but live in gated communities. He exposes the damage done by white saviors who protect dysfunction like it's art. He attacks the lie that government can replace fatherhood. And he reminds us, true dignity doesn't come from how much you suffered, it comes from how much you overcame. There's a reason this book shook people. It didn't say what they wanted to hear. It said what they needed to hear. Because when Sowell wrote Black Rednecks and White Liberals, he wasn't just writing history, he was sounding an alarm. He warned us what would happen if we continued defending chaos in the name of culture. He showed us how white liberals created systems that treat black Americans like museum pieces, frozen in time, frozen in trauma, frozen in 1965. No growth, no agency, no accountability. They turned the black past into a permanent script and handed it out in schools, music, news, politics. And if you dare rewrite that script, they label you a threat, a traitor, an enemy of the people. But here's what Sowell shows with hard data and deeper insight. Black progress happened when values, not pity, led the way. When families were strong, when churches upheld discipline, when communities valued education, order, and ambition, not when government handed out checks and social theories, The more we tried to help with liberal engineering, the worse it got. Because it wasn't help, it was control. And every generation lost to that lie became evidence that the system was working. Not to uplift, but to keep certain people in power by keeping others in pain. The biggest crime? Turning victimhood into virtue. Sowell exposes how entire industries now thrive off black struggle, while punishing any attempt to fix it. Try to reform education, you're a sellout. Preach family values, you're respectability politics. Promote capitalism and ownership, now you're the enemy. The message is clear. Stay in your place, stay angry, stay broken, but never ever succeed on your own terms, because if you do, the whole house of cards falls. The non-profits go broke. The grievance hustlers lose relevance. The politicians have to find a new crisis. So the system is designed to protect pain. But pain is not identity. Struggle is not a crown. And slavery is not a lifelong pass. Sowell's book rips the mask off and tells Black America, you're not less, you're not doomed, but you are being played. And if you want to win, you need new rules. Not rules from the elites, not rules from Washington, not rules written in protest slogans, but timeless principles. Earn what you want, own what you build, lead your home, question the script, think for yourself. Here's what Sowell knew. The most dangerous idea in the world is not racism, it's false compassion. Because false compassion is what lets a system rot from within, while calling it justice. It's what lets brilliant black kids fall through the cracks, because holding them to high standards is insensitive. It's what floods neighborhoods with government cash, but robs them of purpose. It's what cries over injustice, but never builds anything stronger in its place. And worst of all, it's what turns the past into a weapon against the future. Sowell rejects all of it. He says, we are not defined by slavery, we are not defined by oppression, we are defined by what we do next. His message is bold, it's controversial, it's uncomfortable, but it's free. Free from the script, free from the guilt, free from the dependency. He's not asking for permission to speak. He's giving Black America permission to think again, to lead, to break the trance, to stop playing the victim in someone else's movie, and start writing a new story. One built on truth, on action, on values, on pride that isn't performative but earned. Sowell's not here to be liked, he's here to liberate. And liberation starts with this. The culture you inherit is not the culture you must keep. So choose wisely.